Welcome to Super 8. I'm Lauren Bettikini, and that's a mansplainer wearing phallic socks. This week, we're exploring film adaptations of plays, beginning with David Harrower's adaptation of his screenplay Blackbird in the new release Una. Midweek, we'll take a look at Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, then conclude on Tom Noonan's indie What Happened Was. But first, Una. Kai?
Thank you. Una follows the titular character, played by Rooney Mara, as she arrives at the workplace of Ray, played by Ben Mendelsohn, to his surprise and utter dismay. Soon, we learn the reasons for his reaction. When Una was 13, Ray engaged in a sexual relationship with her, and she's looking for closure. Adapted from a play, Una is, for much of its runtime, a very tense two-hander. Mara and Mendelsohn are both excellent, playing their characters' various desires and delusions with complexity and strange, toxic chemistry. Unfortunately, despite its fascinating attempts to complicate a statutory rape case with the uncomfortable tragedy of real emotion, Una suffers from a lack of specificity in character, ultimately robbing its protagonist from the agency she so deserves. Lauren?
To be frank, parts of this film made me feel sick, though that's not necessarily a criticism. For the first two acts, it is unclear if the film is giving legitimacy to Ray's justifications for his grooming and abuse of the young Una. This is because we're seeing the experience of a sexual abuse survivor from their perspective, not from the third person or the predator. And for Una, this is confusing as she struggles to reconcile Ray's manipulations.
Yeah, this is a really interesting film. It's kind of hard to discuss without going into a lot of details, I think, but it's a very bold movie, I think, at the very least.
Yeah. I think what you said in your intro about this film, about Una looking for closure, is really, I found, quite central.
Absolutely. I think it's important to note that she knows this on the surface, but her at least immediate motivations do change throughout it as they reconnect, is the phrase I'd use perhaps. She comes in and she doesn't seem to really know exactly what she wants, and then she says she wants closure, and then it turns into, at least on some end, some idea of rekindling perhaps. I think the undercurrent is always the closure, but I think it becomes complicated. Just as the film, every emotion within this film is very complicated, and they're playing at multiple levels of delusion, like self-delusion, and lying to each other and to themselves.
Yeah. I think, obviously, just by the subject matter, a lot of what happens in this film is very uncomfortable.
Of course.
But I do think that a lot of that was ramped up quite well. They use flashback a lot, and I think a lot of the way that that is structured in terms of having characters go off scene and things implied, and that is
very elliptical, yeah.
Very effective. Or, yeah, very effective. And at times the stillness was really disquieting for me.
I agree, and I think it is adapted from a play, but I think it really the director really pushes it cinematically, not only with the flashbacks, but the way he it's mostly set at this kind of warehouse factory, and he kind of makes it almost unreal. He shoots everything with this weird detached. There's an emptiness to everything that doesn't quite feel stage-like because it's all real, but it feels almost outside of reality and part of this unreality, which I really think pushes the idea that they're almost floating. They're kind of pushing back into this remembrance of this awful thing that happened. They're confused about it themselves.
I thought parts of the setting too kind of helped with the discomfort. I mean, a lot of the main dialogue between the two characters, at least initially, happens in this glass tea room. And I don't know if you've ever worked in a workplace like that, but those tea rooms can just feel uncomfortable themselves because there were so many staff members it's not a comfortable place.
Absolutely.
It's very open and very, yeah, everybody can see. You are exposed.
Absolutely.
And there was so much exposure going on between those characters at that point. Yeah, this film just made me feel sick.
I agree with you. I think there's two things that I think for the most part it does work, and I think it's very bold. And I think there are moments, the ending especially, without really going into details, is such a strong character moment that reveals so much about both of them, and really I think brings it into close without giving either of them really closure. But I think in terms of criticisms against it, I think one, the modern day is set primarily in the modern day, and everything that's not just about Mendelsohn and Mara, who are both phenomenal, by the way. is kind of weak. They got Riz Ahmed in a supporting role he doesn't really do anything, which is a bummer. There's other things that Mendelssohn's doing that don't add up to much.
They've added a subplot in, so all the stuff to do. There's a whole subplot around what's going on in his job at his workplace, and that just feels so tacked on.
Absolutely.
So much of the first and part of the second act is people just walking around this warehouse trying to find them, and everything is totally fabricated just to give some sort of sense of urgency and discomfort, and we might get caught to the conversations that they're having, and it's like it just feels like we're cutting away to these other characters that either disrupts. It didn't work for me.
I agree. I think there's one thing as well that I think there's one thing I didn't like that I think you didn't mind. We talked about this earlier briefly. I think that as good as Mara and Mendelssohn are, I think Mendelssohn is much more specific in his characterization, and I think Mara is painted in more broad strokes and is kind of a cipher for me. She seems not entirely, but very much defined by her victimhood in a way that I think was purposely done to make her kind of a proxy for the abused, and it makes her work better for I think audience projection. But I think it ultimately, especially towards the end of the film, you kind of lose sight of her psychology. And for me, because she's painted so vaguely, I thought it took away a bit of her agency. Where Mendelssohn comes across as a much more conflicted and perhaps interesting character, not necessarily human, but he feels more filled in. And I think ultimately, at the end, it really robbed her character of something that I didn't quite like.
I feel like the thing that I felt as an audience member robbed of in this film, not so much what you're discussing in terms of Mara, it's for me that is more, the whole reason she's there is because of her victimhood, and she wants closure and she wants to sort it out, but I felt like we were robbed of any real specific closure.
Yeah.
And I think as an audience that is interesting because maybe that is the experience, but it feels less satisfying.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
Well, that's it for tonight. Join us for our next episode for a look at the adaptation of Edward Albee's dark play, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? Good night.
Good night.